What's your biggest fear if the Harris-Walz ticket is successful? Are you going to actively campaign for President Trump?
Yes, I will.
You were also talking about being blackballed by the media.
As soon as I said something sensitive, they shut off the feed.
This isn't opinion. This is empirical science, evidence-based. Why do you think they're so threatened? Do you think you can be the determining factor in this presidential election? I was scheduled to fly into Las Vegas to interview former president and current Republican nominee, Donald Trump, to have a sit-down interview with him to talk about what's happening in this run-up to the election, the last 76 days from Friday. Then we get word that RFK Jr. has a press conference and is going to make a really big announcement in Phoenix. So I called RFK Jr. and said, I got a sneaking suspicion what's going to happen. I'd like to talk to you when you walk off of that stage. So I did the interview with former President Trump, jumped on the airplane, flew into Phoenix, and sat down and talked to RFK Jr. here. And as I'm sitting and talking to him, I'm very much aware that I may be talking to the one man that may be the single most outcome determinative individual on who is going to be the next president of the United States. So stay tuned and hear what RFK Jr. has to say that is so powerfully influential in the upcoming election. Robert, thank you for sitting down and talking to me. This has been a really pivotal day in your campaign and your life, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's a difficult day in many respects, but I feel like I'm on the right path.
You had, I think, close to, if not over 1 million people on your live stream for your press conference, and for anybody that is under a rock, you have suspended your campaign. You haven't dropped out of the campaign, you've suspended your campaign. How difficult was this decision?
It was difficult. I mean, all of us, the people, kind of the inner circle who were involved in the decision, I think everybody in that circle went back, did 180-degree turns maybe 15 times in the last 2 weeks trying to figure out what we can do. But ultimately, it was clear to me that because of the media censorship, because I was not going to be allowed on a debating stage, that I didn't really have a path to victory. So my choice was, am I going to spend the next 77 days rallying the troops and getting more money out of the donors without being able to offer them a path to victory? And I think that would have sucked my soul out. And then, I had this interesting series of meetings with President Trump, in which he really surprised me by strongly endorsing the mission for his presidency, saying that he wanted his legacy to end the chronic disease epidemic in this country. And that's been my central mission for the past 20 years, is addressing that issue. What's happening to our kids? We have the sickest children in the world. When I was a kid, about 6% of American children had chronic disease. Today, it's 60%. And these are in basically major categories like neurological illnesses, which is ADD, ADHD, speech delay, language delay, tics, Tourette syndrome, narcolepsy, ASD, autism, autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis and juvenile diabetes, and then the allergic diseases like peanut allergies and food allergies and eczema. And all of these appeared in the mid-1980s. Oh, I never saw anybody with any of these diseases when I was a kid.
I grew up in the 50s, and these weren't issues.
They weren't issues. You didn't know anybody who had diabetes. You certainly did not know anybody who had autism. And now
or peanut allergies.
Or peanut allergies. In fact, Congress asked the EPA, tell us what year these epidemics began. EPA scientists came back and said it's a red line, 1985. That gives us a hint about the culprits, because we know it's not a genetic injury. Genes don't cause epidemics. They may provide the vulnerability, but you need an environmental exposure, an environmental toxin. And so something happened in our kids around that time, and it's probably a lot of different exposures. The collapse of our food system, the industrialization of our food system, et cetera.
You and I have talked before, and I've learned so much about you and so how deeply convicted you are about these things. And I tried to help millions of others that might not know how deeply convicted you are. I think we made a lot of progress in that regard. And I know that you're deciding to run and conducting this campaign came at a very high price to you personally, family-wise, professionally. And now as we sit here, I have to ask you, if you knew then what you know now, would you have done this?
Yeah, I would have. I mean, I think it's been costly to me and it's been costly to my family, but I think I've advanced the issues in a way that is going to be helpful to people over the long run. The major issues that I've been talking about, the censorship, the addiction to war, particularly the Ukraine war, and then most of all, the chronic disease epidemic. And I think, it gave me a platform to talk about those issues, and a lot more people are aware of them now, and a lot more people it's part of the national conversation, which it was not 16 months ago.
Yeah, and I think people on the outside looking in don't realize what a sacrifice it is to make the decision you made. I mean, it's a 16-hour day is like a light day. It's like, well, why get dressed if you're only going to do 16 hours, right? And it's day after day after day. And then you decide to do what you did today. Why now? Was there a reason you did it today instead of 2 weeks ago or 2 weeks down the road?
It was just a confluence of events. I actually would have rather done it a little later. I finished writing my speech today at 11:10, and the press conference started at 11, and I was 30 minutes away. So I was 45 minutes late for the conference because, I had only had really 24 hours to write my statement. And so I would have preferred to do it under a more relaxed regimen, but
Well, you work well under pressure, though.
I work well. We have a team that works well under pressure, and President Trump's staff had a whole series of other needs, and we basically we coalesced around their schedule.
And I was with President Trump this morning, interviewed him in Las Vegas, and then I headed this way. He's not far behind me. And one of the things that I asked him was about you and what you were going to have to say today. And he had a comment about that for the record, and I wanted to share it with you and get your comments about that. RFK Jr. has offered his support to you and your campaign. How do you feel about that?
I'm very honored by it. He's a very smart guy, a different kind of a guy, but very smart, loves our country, has some, I think, very good views on a lot of different things. And I've known him for a long time. We've been somewhat friendly, actually. And I think he's going to be a great asset. I think he adds a lot to the election. He's got a good following, tremendous following. I think he adds a lot to the election, and I think he adds a lot to if we win. I mean, he's got some very interesting ideas and good ideas. I think he'll be a fantastic and influential person in terms of getting this country back on track. I think if we win, I think he can be very valuable to the country, and I think he can also help us build up the margins.
Will he have a role in your administration? He's a very experienced trial lawyer.
He is.
He's tried a lot of large cases, and a lot of it environmental. So I thought, he might play a role environmentally. He might play a role as Attorney General. There's a lot of things he could offer to the administration.
That's true. No, he's a very smart guy,
But you welcome him.
I do.
You welcome his support.
Well, number one, I've known him a long time,
Right.
and I've always had a good relationship. I mean, we're sort of on opposite sides of some issues, but I've always had a good relationship with him, and I'm very honored by his support.
Well, I've spoken to him about you in the past, and he's always spoken of you with a great deal of respect. Even though you guys have been campaigning against each other, he's always spoken of you with a great deal of respect. What's your reaction to his comments?
I think he's accurate. We've known each other for a long time. In fact, I've litigated against him. I've sued him a couple of times on golf courses that he was building, or he's trying to build up in the New York State reservoir watershed. And I was suing to keep them from being built. But even during that time when I was litigating against him, he ended up giving me a ride to Florida on his plane. So, and we were friendly. And, we had a great time and a lot of laughs. He's a very congenial, amiable, interesting guy, and very warm.
Do you foresee pushing your agenda forward, maybe as part of that administration? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, we talked about that. We talked about his commitment to chronic disease. It's one of the things that brought us together. A couple of hours after the assassination attempt, Phil, I got a call from Callie Means, who's kind of the leading advocate in the country against chronic disease and against processed food, which is really poisoning our children. He's been advising me for a long time and consulting with me. And he called me that night and he said that he was also advising President Trump on this issue, which made me happy that President Trump even, knew about this issue. And he asked if I'd be willing to talk to President Trump, and I said yes. And President Trump then called me a little while later. And then we ended up meeting with each other the following day and then doing a series of meetings. And a lot of that time we spent talking about the Ukraine war, about dismantling this addiction that we have to foreign wars, but also talking about the chronic disease epidemic. And, President Trump said that he wanted that as his legacy to solve it. So, I'll do anything that I can to make sure that happens.
Having gotten to know you as I have the feeling that you feel a sense of commitment to your supporters and to your donors, and the things that they've supported and continued to. I can't imagine you telling them that journey or fight is over. You're going to continue to push those issues, and part of the way to do that might be through the administration, or it could be in other ways, but there's no way you're going to let up on the things that you've been espousing. I heard you in your press conference thanking them for their support and letting them know that's not over. You're continuing those same agendas, those same priorities. That's still important to you.
Yeah, I'm going to use my own resources, my energies and talents, as long as I can. This is, to me, the most important issue in our country today because we have the highest chronic disease burden of any country in the world, and it's destroying us. It's $4.3 trillion a year. It's costing our country 5 times the military budget. When my uncle was president, the medical expenditures on chronic disease were zero. Today, it's 95% of our healthcare expenditures. It's sinking our country. And we're getting sicker and sicker. We're paying twice what Europeans do for healthcare. We have the worst healthcare outcomes in the world. It's all because we're being mass poisoned by processed foods, by pesticides, by chemicals, by pharmaceutical drugs. And there's a series of industries that actually make money by keeping us sick. It's not just industries, but it's the med schools, the hospitals, the insurance companies you would think would want us healthy, but they actually make more money if we get sicker. And then, of course, the pharmaceutical companies, if you have a chronic disease, you're a lifetime patient. This drug, Ozempic, costs $1,500 for a week. And there's now a bill before Congress that would force the insurance companies, Medicare, to pay for it for every American who's obese. Well, that's 74% of our population.
Right.
That's going to be $3 trillion a year. And for a tiny fraction of that, you could give every American 3 meals a day of organic food, and diabetes would disappear overnight. Diabetes is treatable with food, right, with exercise, and obesity is.
And, what you talk about is empirically verified. This isn't just some theory that you hatch in your back room sometime. These things are factually based. They're empirical. And I think that's so important. It was important to me that whenever you were talking about this, you were also talking about being blackballed by the media, because we had so many people that were not wanting to put you on the air, ABC, NBC, CBS, all the major networks, and this has continued. Now, at Merit Street, we put you on, of course, and going to continue to put you on, as long as we can lure you in there, because we're talking about science. This isn't opinion. This is empirical science, evidence-based. Why do you think they're so threatened?
The television networks are very, very dependent on pharmaceutical advertising. I knew Roger Ailes very well. Roger Ailes was, of course, the founder of Fox News and the CEO of Fox News for many years. He and I were on opposite sides of the political spectrum, but we had this friendship that survived all that. He would always made sure that I could get on his platform to talk about environmental issues. So I was the only environmentalist who was going on Sean Hannity and Bill O'Reilly and Neil Cavuto for many, many years. And at one point I made a film about the impacts of the relationship between mercury and this epidemic of neurological injuries and mercury in medical products. And I showed him the film, and he said, you know, I have a family member who I think was injured by this. And he said, this is a really important film. He said, I can't allow you onto my network for this, because for the evening news division, about 70% of our revenues are coming from pharmaceutical companies. And he said to me at that time that typically there are 23 ads on a evening news segment, a show, and that 17 of those on average are pharmaceutical. Mm-hmm. He said, if any of my hosts allowed you on TV, I'd have to fire them. And if I didn't, I would hear from Rupert, meaning Rupert Murdoch, within 10 minutes. Yeah. He was very clear to me about that. I've seen that evidence across the board with all of the networks. They're very, very sensitive to their advertisers. And those companies are advertising not just as a platform for selling product, but also because they can dictate content. They can make sure that, you know, who's ever on that news show is towing the line.
Well, we had Kelly Means on my show, Dr. Phil Primetime, talking about the very things that you're focusing on here, and my audience was fascinated because there were things they had not heard before.
Yeah.
There were facts, information they had not heard. And that show, we put it on we have an app, Merit Plus, where you can watch those shows after the fact. And that show just continued its audience grew and grew and it continues to this day to grow based on the information that was given.
Yeah.
People were fascinated by
Yeah,
what he had to say.
he's riveting.
You're exactly right, and people don't know because the information is not being put out there. Did you ever think you would see this kind of censorship in our lifetime? If you want to see more of our conversation, we have an app, Merit Plus. It's free. Download it, and you can watch us on your phone or your iPad. Take us wherever you go. Doesn't matter.